Hello! Today I'd like to share one more idea for weaving I've mastered recently. I've been inspired by an American master, Herald. I'll share the link. When weaving a hedgehog, I enjoyed this hairy or spiny style. Herald's works have inspired me to continue mastering it. I watched some masters trying this technique. However, it has taken me quite a while to try and do myself. Finally, having tried and learned the issues, I feel ready to share my experience. This style is good for weaving vases, cash pots, fruit trees, especially vases. A few words regarding shapes. The technique is perfect for cylinder-shaped items, however it also matches the ones narrowing or widening as well as roundish, shifting to the cylinder. I mean, you are free to experiment with various shapes. I'd like to show you this weaving technique on the example of a normal cylinder-shaped vase. I've started weaving in a standard way, made the round bottom, lifted the poles and woven 3 rows. After which I start creating hairs or spines. By trial and error, I've concluded that the intervals between the poles should be equal to about 1 centimeter, about half an inch. I use doubled poles in order to make them strong and prevent them from curling. I'd also like to add that you have to think over a combination of colors in advance, since it depends on the number of poles. I'd like to make a 4-colored vase, that's why the number of poles have to be divisible by 4. So I've taken 16 poles of 4 colors. For my pattern I've got to use 4 turquoise tubes at once, then 4 sandy ones, 4 brown and 4 light beige tubes. So let's start. Try your best to make the intervals between the spines identical. Let's try this way. Here I've got the first pole marked as a starting point. Place the tube behind the pole, in front of, behind, in front of, lead out. Take the next one. Try to the previous tube, measure the spine length, make a kind of a bend, place behind the next pole, in front of the following one, behind, lead out. 2 more tubes. I cut them into halves. Measure the length, place behind the pole, in front of, behind, lead out. Repeat all the same steps for the 4th tube. That's all, the turquoise section is finished. Start the dark sandy one. Continue. I've tried finishing each row, but I don't like the result. I prefer weaving spirally. Repeat all the same actions. Introduce 4 sandy tubes into work, feed the size and place behind the following pole. I enjoy this way of weaving. It is rather fast. It only takes me 1 evening to make a vase, in case I've got the tubes prepared beforehand. So, I've introduced 4 sandy tubes. Shift to the brown ones. Continue this way till you reach the turquoise starting point again. So I've finished the first row and reached the first marked pole. Take a note please that one tube spine sticks out from one side, while the opposite one sticks out from the other side. Continue weaving the next row in spiral. It is quite a challenge to plan the tube length to make identical spines sticking out from both sides, especially if you create a widening or narrowing item. That's why I've calculated the intervals between the poles by way of trial. But anyway, when the work is finished I have to cut the spines a bit, but let's get back to it later. For now we continue weaving spirally the way we've started. 4 turquoise tubes, then 4 sandy, 4 brown and 4 beige ones. Now I'd like to change the pattern a bit. Since I've already had vertical color stripes, I'd like to shift them a little. I've woven 4 rows in the pattern I've mentioned. Take a look please, it is very easy to count the rows. Now I'd like to weave the following 4 rows a bit shifted. I mean, after having woven 4 beige tubes, I add 1 more, only after which I start weaving turquoise tubes. I'm going to shift every 4 rows, getting a more interesting pattern this way. Continue 4 turquoise tubes, 4 sandy ones, and so on, shifting the pattern by 1 pole. I've woven 12 rows. The height is quite sufficient. I use this vase as a pattern. Now I'm going to weave 3 or 4 rows of a 3 tube robe, after which I will finish with some simple edge trimming. I need some moderate trimming, not to distract attention from the main zest, the very pattern. Well, actually I'm done with what I was going to show you regarding the pattern. Try your best to tighten the rows when weaving to avoid intervals between the rows, otherwise it will look untidy. I'd like to add a few words on my failures to help you avoid them. On this bowl, I've tried using entire tube lengths without cutting them into halves. I inserted a tube and engaged it up to the very end, having gotten several coils. As a result, I've got the plate not hairy enough. I dislike it this way. Do you see the rows are rather flat? Well, actually it is a kind of a layer-wise weaving technique. In my opinion, more hairy items look much nicer. As for color combinations, an item can be vertically striped or single-colored. Besides, I've experimented with the intervals between the poles until I found an optimal one. Here the intervals were too large and the rows are too loose. It wouldn't be so evident on a vase, while you can clearly see it on a bowl. Here I've decided to try and make the intervals between the poles very little. As a result, I've got a hedgehog, too tight and spiny. Well, it is not too bad, but I prefer the intervals like I've got in this vase, about 1–1.5 centimeters, 2–3 inches. After the hairy section has been woven, I cut the spines in order to shape the vase smooth. When we've started weaving, we've tried our best to keep the left spines identical by fitting them to the previous ones. As for the right spines, as a rule they differ in length. That's why I take a row, let me show you an example of this one, and cut at about one level. Well, maybe one can estimate the length needed beforehand. I've personally selected this method. Take the following row and cut all the tails to the same length. The next row, they are quite distinct. Afterwards, you can turn the item over to check yourself. Look, I've got it star or snowflake shaped. The tails already cut are more or less identical. The ones not trimmed yet differ in length. In order to make the item look still nicer, I paint the edges afterwards. As a rule, I've got some extra paint left. Well, it does take some extra time, but it is worthwhile since it makes the item much neater. As for final treating, the item is rather easy to varnish. At first I've tried sprinkling it with lacquer from a spray bottle, but it gets obstructed with a mixture of varnish and water. That's why I take a brush and cover the item with varnish carefully with such strokes. Before I finish, let me add a few words on the option I haven't tried yet, but maybe I'll do a bit later. Since we've started discussing the topic, I believe this option has a right to exist too. You weave 4 hairy rows, then 2 rows in a normal rope-like technique, then 4 hairy rows more, followed by 2 regular rope rows, and so on. Well, actually that's all I wanted to tell you. I like this technique, it is rather decorative. So good luck to everyone who'd like to try it.